I think there is a gradual awakening, an awareness of the extent and ambition of China's surveillance activities, sort of multi-domain surveillance activities. And I would certainly expect more attention to be given to those programs to understand them better and to the extent possible to frustrate them. I would certainly hope that would be the case.
Well, Nigel Inkster is a former Director of Operations and Intelligence at MI6. He's now Senior Advisor on China and Cyber at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Good evening to you, Nigel.
Good evening.
Good to have you with us. Is it surprising that the US, with all its sophisticated intelligence and anti-cyber security operations, doesn't actually know what these three latest objects were or are?
Not entirely, no. I mean, as the spokesman said when he admitted that the US didn't know what these objects are. They're very different from the so-called balloon, though I think it's better described as an airship or a dirigible that was shot, that was identified 10 days ago. These objects seem to be very different. They didn't seem to be under any form of control. They were just drifting. And I suspect that this is, to some extent, an element of political theater. Again, the Biden administration, as with the, let's call it dirigible, shooting it down to demonstrate that it was prepared to be very tough on situations like this.
Yeah, I mean, we heard some descriptions of, as you say, the first object was a balloon or an airship, but the latest one seemed to include something that was rectangular with a piece of string hanging down. I mean, have you ever heard of anything like that before?
No, I haven't, and I have no idea, any more than anyone else, what these things were. I think we're going to have to wait until debris has been collected and analysed before making any sense of this.
Do you think, though, as clearly the US suspects, that they are all part of some form of Chinese surveillance operation?
Again, I don't know. I think the first, airship that was identified and shot down over the Carolina coast, it's pretty obvious that was part of an intelligence collection capability. We've now learned that a lot more about this capability which the Chinese have got, marrying very old technology rather ingeniously with new technologies. That much is pretty clear, notwithstanding Chinese denials that this was, an intelligence collecting vehicle. They keep on saying it's, a weather balloon. It's clearly not. The others, may have been. We just don't know yet. But it doesn't look to me as if they are obviously part of a systematic intelligence collection effort, which the first airship clearly was.
So you think that these latest objects could be part of that wider operation?
It doesn't look like it, but again, we just don't have enough information, to be clear about that at the moment.
John Kirby also seemed to suggest that there had been incidents like this which the previous Trump administration had failed to act on. I mean, are you aware, do you understand that, or do you think that's another bit of political theatre, perhaps?
Well, I don't know. Again, when a country, when something like this happens, there are a range of possible responses. If you see something you think is an intelligence gathering operation, you can choose to let it run, so you can understand better what's going on, may be able to use it in order to disseminate disinformation to the country that's behind this, or you can quietly close it down, or you can close it down and make a big fuss. And countries do these things in different ways, in different sets of circumstances. So it's not inconceivable that some of these things had been known about and a decision taken to observe them and understand better what they were for. Again, we don't have enough hard information to make a definitive judgment on this.
Rishi Sunak was making it clear that the government takes this all very seriously, stressing the potential of using rapid reaction forces. The Defence Secretary is apparently reviewing the threat. Do you think there is the possibility that we've had similar objects to this floating around over the UK?
It's quite possible. I mean, the airship, balloon, call it what we will, that was first identified is capable of operating at very high altitudes. Therefore, it's entirely imaginable that it may have passed over, that something like that may have passed over the UK without our becoming aware of it. But of course, now people, are alert to this particular issue, have a better idea what to look for. So I would imagine that going forward, things are going to look rather different. I mean, we don't know what the Chinese are going to do in response to this. And I think, there are some very interesting questions to be asked about, who within the Chinese administration did not think through the implications of having the first balloon over the United States at a time when the US was about to embark with something China wanted, an exercise to put a floor under the deteriorating relationship. And I suspect that this was just plain old cock up, a failure of interdepartmental coordination. But will they back down in the face of international pressure, or will they brazen it out and keep on carrying on with this program? We have to wait and see.
Do you think, though, that these incidents might perhaps heighten awareness and but perhaps create more defensive measures here in the UK about the threat of surveillance from China? We've seen a growing body of particularly Conservative MPs expressing their concerns about Chinese activities. We had the whole row over Huawei and so on. Is this, do you think, going to lead to a more robust approach perhaps from the British government?
Well, that remains to be seen, but I think there is a gradual awakening, an awareness of the extent and ambition of China's surveillance activities, sort of multi-domain surveillance activities, and I would certainly expect more attention to be given to those programs to understand them better and to the extent possible to frustrate them. I would certainly hope that would be the case.
And do you think that should lead to perhaps a reassessment of Chinese involvement in crucial infrastructure like our nuclear power stations?
Well, again, I think it depends on the nature of the project. It's not clear to me why Chinese involvement in building a nuclear power plant is that risky, provided that adequate precautions are taken to ensure that in a worst case situation, China would not be able to close down or sabotage the project. In other areas, in telecommunications, surveillance cameras being obvious examples, one has to look at this rather differently.
Let me just ask you about one other issue. Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, has said today, ahead of this key meeting of NATO defence ministers and, of course, the big security conference coming up in Munich at the weekend, that he believes that a renewed Russian offensive is effectively already underway in Ukraine. Is that something that you think is already really happening?
I think the signs are there. Russia is a country that tends to be obsessed with dates and anniversaries. And I think it's pretty clear that Vladimir Putin wants to achieve something that he can call a success in time for the 24th of February, the date on which the so-called special operation was first launched. So yes, the question is, exactly what Russia will try to do, and whether with the rather poor quality forces it has at its disposal, it's going to be able to do that. I mean, I don't think we should, although notwithstanding Russia's poor military performance to date, I don't think we can afford to underestimate Russia. They clearly have learnt from their earlier experiences. They are doing some things quite a lot better now than they were. And they do have a certain depth of resources. So it's a threat that can't be underestimated.
And just finally, do you think that the UK and its allies should send or find ways of sending those fighter jets, which President Zelensky made such an impassioned plea for last week?
I'm not so sure about that. I think it certainly makes sense to send tanks. I can't help wondering whether what would be more useful for the Ukrainians is more in the way of air defense capabilities. But I think we'll have to see how these things play out. I mean, obviously, everybody's worried about the risk of escalation. To a degree, I think up until now that has been overdone. Russia has issued dire warnings about the consequences of providing various forms of equipment to Ukraine. We've done it, and nothing's happened. But at the same time, I do think that Putin, is in a rather psychologically unstable situation. He's isolated. There is nobody really who can influence his behavior. So one can't, afford to underestimate the risk that he might, make an intemperate and ill-judged decision. So these things have to be, monitored very carefully. But I would think that if the situation within Ukraine on the ground changed, for the worse for Ukraine, this would occasion a reassessment of the desirability of providing more fighter jets. So I think we'll just have to see how that goes. And I wouldn't want to be the person who said, we've got to send them or we absolutely mustn't. I think this is going to be dependent on how the battlefield evolves.
Nigel Inkster, former Director of Operations and Intelligence, MI6. Really good to speak to you. Thanks so much.